What's up, everybody? Welcome to the exam breakdown. My name is D. Kumar, and I am here to help you study during this short break time that you might have. Let's say it's a lunch break or something like that. You're getting ready for a real estate examination. You want to kind of like freshen up. You want to make sure that you're applying maximum effort, and you want to make sure you pass this thing. So my goal today is to go through some content, get you acclimated with it, talk about some stuff, look at some practice questions, and then have you on your way. So the goal of the exam breakdown on Mondays is to go over real estate licensing for real estate brokers, real estate salespersons. My goal for you is to make sure that you're learning the things that you need to know about the topics. And as important, we can eliminate certain things that you don't really need. There's some elements of theory that you'll absolutely need to be able to string together. And once you do that, you should be able to do a lot better on exams. But then there's a lot of extraneous information that is just irrelevant for the exam purposes. Now, hear me out. When you're looking to master a subject, get really involved into something, then by all means, become a student of the game, study this stuff and work through it. But what I often find is a lot of students will take a real estate course or take something like that, and it'll be like this 600-700 page textbook. And then the age old question is, well, what do I study? So the point of our channel, one of the many, is to help you cut through the drag to find the information that you need to, the relevant stuff that you want to study and focus on so that you can get through this exam. And again, I look at it pragmatically, like there's opportunity costs. A lot of students end up making this a lot harder because they take way more time than they need. And by all means, take as much time as you want. Everybody learns differently. And so like, that's not the point. But the point is if somebody can help push you in the right direction and show you what you need to focus on, and more importantly, avoid the things that you really don't need to know that much. And again, could a test writer give you a question about something that I don't cover? Yes, absolutely. But after training tens of thousands of people, like tons of people, I've been doing this for a very long time and have written books and done all of this stuff in this particular space and have trained so many people to pass examinations in these and many disciplines. I can assure you that it's not about getting 100% on this thing. It's about getting your license, and then you start learning and learning and learning. And if real estate is for you, then you'll be a life student like I am. I learn about stuff every day of the week, and I'm constantly shaping and building what I do. All right, so there's a little motivation for you. Today's topic in the exam breakdown, and again, we're going about maybe 30, 35, 40 minutes. I'll have you out of here in no time. And if you can't be live with us, that's okay as well. We'll always post these live events, on our channel, and you'll be able to see it and watch it later, watch it at your leisure. Today's topic is contracts. We just recently saw a couple of questions. A student said that they recently, I forget their handle, but they said, they've taken the test a few times and they've performed sort of mediocre on the contract section. I think it was like 6 out of 14, 7 out of 14 in terms of questions. And so what I want to do today is kind of go over a little bit of contracts to kind of brush up for that, for hopefully you're listening to it. And if not, watch it. We'll tag you later and let you know that we've posted this. But if any of y'all have questions, go ahead and feel free to send them in. We totally are paying attention to what you're saying, and the wonderful comments about people passing and everything else. Those are great. Questions about material, questions about things you would like me to see teach, things of that nature. Go ahead and let them rip. Let us know in the comments, and we'll be happy to see if we can address them. Like this student came to us a couple of days ago, and we happen to be going live, so we're like, all right, let's just do something on contracts and put it together that way. All right, so the idea here is to make sure that we are supporting you in your learning, and with contracts, there is some important concepts, and these are the most heavily represented section, as a matter of fact, across the United States will be contracts. So contracts are something that we definitely want to know about as we're doing this through and throughout. So you want to focus on this. And I'm going to try to show you a couple of things here that I think you ought to focus on as you're studying. So first off, things like clauses in real estate contracts. So clauses are specific provisions in a contract that outlines certain rights, obligations, or conditions for the parties involved. And so contracts have clauses, these conditions, and these contingencies, and these addendums, and these amendments, and all of these other vocab phrases that kind of go hand in hand with contracts. By a long stretch, these two that are right here in terms of common are probably the two biggest ones that you see in a contract between a borrower and a lender known as a mortgage. So the acceleration clause, let me just have something to write on here. Let's do this in red. Let's do it like that big. All right, so the first things first, we have the acceleration clause. And this is very, very important. Think like an accelerator pedal moves a vehicle faster. An acceleration clause allows the lender to demand full repayment of the loan if the borrower defaults. So the classic example is if you miss multiple payments, the lender could accelerate the loan. So the acceleration clause is the lender's right to call the mortgage due and payable on the default of the consumer. So the consumer defaults in some way, in this example, doesn't make a payment, and that triggers the acceleration clause. All right, so the acceleration clause, think of an accelerator pedal and speeding up, in this case, speeding up the payment, speeding up payback. The next one is something known as the alienation clause. And again, this one is also very important. The alienation clause is also known as, and you see this on exams, sometimes refer to it as the due on sale clause. And again, both of these two clauses, just so you know, happen to be in a mortgage contract, because a mortgage is a contract also. Really, what is the contract is the note. The promissory note, the promise to repay. All right, so this alienation clause prevents the borrower from transferring. The word alienation means to transfer. So this is a transfer clause. The mortgage to somebody else without the lender's consent. Or the alienation clause prevents the borrower from transferring the ownership of the property. I'll also write that, transferring the title. So in this case, transferring the mortgage or the loan obligation to somebody else in terms of like an assumable loan, but it also means transfer of title. So if you were to sell your property, before you can sell your property, you have to pay the lender back. That's what the alienation clause is, and it's very classic. You're going to see it on your exam. I would say in terms of probabilities, acceleration and alienation are like high probability. I would learn these definitions. You're going to see them. Other common clauses that you typically see in our world of contracts, the habendum clause. This is one that you see. Habendum means to have and to hold. So the habendum clause defines the ownership rights being transferred in a deed. It specifies the extent of ownership that the grantee, meaning the buyer, will receive. So habendum simply means to have and to hold. It's like marriage vows, but the habendum clause is in a deed. And so in a deed, in this exchange of transferring of ownership of real property, in that particular style, the habendum clause is going to refer to what type of interest you're receiving. So it could say to have and to hold in fee simple, or to have and to hold in fee simple absolute, or for your life. So the habendum clause casts a light. The words coming immediately after the habendum clause will indicate what type of interest you are receiving. So it'll say, to have and to hold in fee simple absolute, which, as you're learning in these types of courses, is the highest form of ownership recognized by the United States law. All right, so that's habendum clause. Contingency clause makes the contract dependent on specific conditions, like the buyer getting financing or satisfactory home inspections. So in terms of clauses, we call the contingency clause its own thing. And there are several contingencies, which we'll take a peek at, that are also going to show up on this exam. The defeasance clause is another one. So again, these are all high probability. The defeasance clause, the lender relinquishes their right to the property once the debt has been paid. So I look at it like this. Once I've defeated the mortgage, once I've paid it off, the lender has to release the lien. So the defeasance clause basically is language in a deed, in a mortgage, that basically says, hey, listen, when you pay us back, we have to remove the lien from your property. That's our job. And they have to do that because of the defeasance clause. So defeasance clause is another one. So far we've looked at acceleration, alienation, habendum, and defeasance. Okay. Now, not all of these are in purchase contracts, by the way. We're also talking about the other documents of transaction in the business, like habendum clauses in the deed. An option clause gives one party the right to act within a specified time frame. So there could be a clause in a contract that renders the contract an option. Remember, an option agreement is a type of unilateral contract, and there's an option or and an option E. And only the option E has the right to perform. And then the final one here is the severability clause. If one part of the contract is found to be unenforceable, then the rest of the contract could still stand. So severability is an important concept. Many times in contracts, generally speaking, some piece of the contract language might be unenforceable. What does that mean? Unenforceable is a phrase that you will see on a real estate exam. So they want you to know what it means. Unenforceable means by a court. So if the court has to get involved to force one of the parties or both of the parties to perform on a contract, then that is an enforceable contract. It's enforceable by the courts. Now, there's 2 degrees of enforceability. In contracts are enforceable between the parties. So let's say you and I enter into a contract. Well, we have a social contract kind of going right now, right? But there's no expectation for you. There's an expectation for me. So I go live every Monday. I go live every Wednesday. If I don't show up today, it's not going to kill anybody. Obviously, we're just growing this, and this is initially. But if I have a bigger audience, it's going to matter a lot more. It could matter to advertisers. It could matter to all kinds of people, right? So there is this enforceability. Right now, it's a contract that I'm making to you, and that you, if you're showing up live, are making back to me. This is an enforceable contract between the parties. But the courts, if we went to courts and say, hey, if I go to the court right now and say, hey, court, my subscribers aren't tuning in live, I want to sue them all, the court's going to laugh at me. This is an unenforceable social contract that we have going here, and which means the courts are going to say, dude, go home. There's nothing we can do. But let's say if you and I had something in writing and that it was written perfectly with all of the essential elements of a contract, that you promised to show up, I promise to teach, and you pay me a fee for that. Like, let's say if you paid for one of our courses and, I'm teaching it live, or it's like a licensing course or something like that. Then if I default on my obligations, then there's enforceability. You could go to court and sue me, or have a judge force me to show up, or force me to perform, or force me to pay you back for all the money you fronted me. So there's enforceable. Enforceable is that the courts can jump in, intervene, and do something about it. Now, pieces of contracts can be unenforceable. So as mightily as it was written perfectly by the best attorney of contracts on the planet, somebody could write something that might be unenforceable or unconscionable, that may not work in a court. Or maybe a piece of law or legislation shows up that sort of contradicts that particular bit of language in a contract. But everything else is still enforceable. And that's what a severability clause is. It's basically saying that even if something were to be not correct in this contract, the majority of the contract, the spirit of the contract, still can be enforced, so long as it is enforceable in court. That's severability. That's pretty fancy of thinking about it. I think severability really, for you on a real estate exam, really is about default and breach, okay? Breach of contract and the remedies to breach. I really think severability is going to be a low probability. But I think in terms of high probability, acceleration, alienation, habendum, defeasance, and a couple of the contingencies, and I think you're fine. All right, let's take a look at this practice question. Which clause in a loan agreement allows the lender to demand full repayment upon the sale of the property? Letter A, acceleration clause. Letter B, alienation clause. Letter C, habendum clause. Letter D, defeasance clause. And the answer? Letter B, alienation clause. So the alienation clause is the full repayment upon the sale of the property. So really it's about the sale or the transfer. So they said sale here, Another word is the transfer. So the alienation clause is a transfer clause. Don't forget that. This is a classic one, and they're going to do stuff like this. They're going to throw acceleration, and they're going to say, hey, it's, allows due and, full repayment. And before the acceleration clause is if you default, and then they can demand full repayment for default. But this is upon the sale. So this is the subtle difference here, and that's why alienation and acceleration always show up on real estate exams. Another question, which clause in a loan agreement allows the borrower to gain clear title after paying off their mortgage? Letter A, habendum clause. Letter B, severability clause. Letter C, acceleration clause. Letter D, defeasance clause. Santa Claus. Sorry. All right, here we go. And the answer? Letter D, defeasance clause. And again, this is how this will be brought on an examination. Which clause in a loan agreement allows the borrower to gain clear title? And so once you've defeated the mortgage, they must release the loan, defeasance. I'll use an auditory mnemonic or memory device like that to try to remember what defeasance means. And so that for me, that's how I would sort of approach this stuff. That's how I try to kind of think about it. Depends on if you can do it with some of these or not. But defeasance works that, once I've completely paid off or defeated the mortgage loan, then they must release the lien. And sort of that is how they will bring a question like this on an exam. All right, some basic pieces here with contracts as well. Elements of a valid contract, mutual agreement. All right, these are all the elements of a valid contract. A valid contract is a contract that has all of these elements. All right, there are 5 of these elements. And in addition to these 5 elements, just coming back on there. In addition to these 5 elements, if it has all of these 5 elements and it's done for legal purposes, then it is an enforceable contract. We just learned about that phrase, enforceable. Okay, enforceable. Now, so mutual agreement is something called an offer and an acceptance. So for every offer, there must be an acceptance. Now, there must be a complete meeting of the minds, they say sometimes. You'll see that on your real estate books. A meeting of the minds basically means that we must understand the nature completely of what we're about to enter into. All of the components, all of the variables. Now, some things might be still negotiable, but we still both must understand what's happening. And that's sort of these offer and acceptance. Now, trick questions on offer and acceptance. If I offer to buy your property for $500,000 and I want to close in 60 days, and you say, fine, $500,000, I'll take it, but I want to close in 30 days, that wasn't a meeting of the minds. Even though we agreed on price, we didn't agree on all of the terms. We changed the timing of close. And because of that, that wasn't an accepted offer. That was a rejection of the original offer. I'll offer you $500,000 and we close in 60 days. And then you counter offered me by saying, I'll take $500,000, but I want to close in 30 days. And I didn't accept that yet. Now, if I accept that, then we have an offer and an acceptance of that offer. Then we have a meeting of the minds. So the mutual agreement is an important and critical component. You want to know understanding offer, complete offer, and complete acceptance. They'll play with you there. And they also will make you understand what a counter offer is. And one other variable that I want you to learn about is what happens with timing of an offer and multiple offer scenarios. So you'll see little blurbs of that stuff depending on the books, that you're studying with. Ask your instructors as you're learning with them, can you please give me an example of what happens if somebody says, this offer is good until this day, but then they accept another offer? Like what happens during those scenarios? All right. Consideration is another piece. Consideration is something of value between the parties. It's something that's good and valuable. Excuse me, just take a sip. So something that's good and valuable between the parties is consideration. All contracts need to have it. Now, sometimes it could be for the property itself or the appraised value of the property as of a certain date and time, or it might be for love and affection. It depends on what's moving, what both perceive to be valuable as consideration. Intent. What is the intent of both parties to the contract? What is their ability to enter into a contract? Is this thing for a legal purpose? Now, this is a classic one. If a contract has all of the other elements, but it's for something illegal, then it's a void contract. So if a contract is missing any of these elements, the contract is void. So a valid contract is necessary to have all of these elements. And if it's missing any of these, then it's void. The in-between phrase is voidable. And voidable contracts trip folks up. A voidable contract could, in fact, have all of these elements. It could be written perfectly. It's a real legit contract. But for some reason, one or both of the parties can back out for some reason, right? The classic one falls into capacity. Legally competent parties is where you many times see this referenced on real estate examinations. It could be somebody that's mentally incapacitated. It could be somebody that's a minor entering into a contract, a kid entering into a contract with somebody that's of legal age. So these contracts are written perfectly. They have all of the essential elements. However, for some reason, one or both can disaffirm or rescind their part of the contract. So that's another vocab phrase that you guys want to know. To rescind means to take back. It means to go back as if this contract had never been entered into in the first place. All parties go back to square one. So if there's any money spent or anything like that, then everybody gets their money back and stuff back, and we go and we part, right? We leave each other. And so that's the difference between a rescission and, let's say, a cancellation of a contract. Rescind versus cancel a contract. So really, you're going to see void, voidable, and valid, and you'll see it knowing that valid has to have these elements. Voidable has something that is, for some reason we can get out, and it's typically capacity, and a void contract is missing one of these. The classic void contract is a contract for something illegal, okay? So here we go. We got valid contracts meet all of the essential legal elements. We just took a look at those essential legal elements. A void contract lacks some or all of these essential legal elements. And again, remember the void trick that they always throw on exams is the contract for something illegal. All right, so an illegal contract would be void. Voidable appears to be valid, but it may be rescinded or disaffirmed by one or both parties based on some legal principle. A minor enters into a contract, they can back out of their portion of the contract. Now, the other party might still have to perform certain pieces of that contract, but a voidable contract is something that appears to be valid, but for some reason we can back out. Maybe there wasn't a full meeting of the minds. Maybe the contract lacked sufficient consideration, rendering the contract voidable by one or both of the parties. Unenforceable appears to be valid, but neither party can sue the other for performance. So again, you want to know the difference between enforceable and unenforceable. And again, the operative phrase here is to sue. And where do we bring suit? We bring suit in a court. So an enforceable contract, I want you to know for your exam, really means by court for your purposes. Again, I mentioned earlier that it could mean an enforceable contract between two parties. That's certainly fine. But they're really talking about the enforceability or the unenforceability of a contract because you can't sue for performance. Let's check out this practice question. So which of the following is not required for a valid real estate contract? Letter A, mutual agreement. Letter B, lawful purpose. Letter C, earnest money. Letter D, competent parties. And the answer? Letter C, earnest money. So, just to point something out here, all the other ones are lawful purpose, competent parties. That's capacity, and then mutual agreement, offer and acceptance. Now, with earnest money, it is often customary, but not required, to put money up to show good faith. As a matter of fact, you don't have to. However, knowing that, you will, you will not see that ever happen in real estate contracts, real estate sales. So when you get in the field, it's always like, to buy in this offer, here's a check for $1,000. And then at a certain date, we want X more money. This is just pushing people to show that they're serious about the commitment. So money kind of proves the fact that you're serious about moving forward, which is why we use good faith money, earnest money in these transactions. However, it's not required. So earnest money is not required, and it's not an essential part of a contract. So you don't have to put up money to move forward in contract. You can absolutely continue to contract and just, go about doing it without putting any down payments. But again, in practice, this is not going to happen. It does happen, but it just doesn't happen that often in like mass market transactions where you're working at a brokerage firm. You're going to make sure that there's money being, collected and held, and to show seriousness and to move things along. Next question is, which contingency is most likely to protect the buyer if the property doesn't appraise for the purchase price? Now, we didn't talk about these particular contingencies, but let's go give it a go, and then I'll go through those. Letter A, financing contingency. Letter B, inspection contingency. Letter C, home sale contingency. Letter D, default contingency. And the answer? Letter A, financing contingency. All right, so this is something that we tend to see with classic contingencies. The financing contingency is something that we usually see. It's also called the mortgage contingency, so they might call it that on the exam, aka mortgage contingency. An inspection contingency is fairly standard. Again, inspection can be for pest inspection. It could be for home inspection. It could be something like an environmental audit. It could be something like that. So inspection is pretty broad-based, and that'll be detailed in the contracts, but an inspection contingency is in there. And with regular residential transaction, it could be if there's any defects or damages found up to a certain price, then we reserve the right to get our deposit back and leave. And so inspection contingencies absolutely do that. The home sale contingency is basically saying that if you are looking to buy my property, the buyer says, D, I'll buy your property, but I can only buy it if I can sell my property. I want to put a home sale contingency in there. So then the property sale contingency or the home sale contingency, I'll also say property sale, is what they sometimes call it in different jurisdictions. The property sale contingency will say, hey, if I cannot sell my property, then I cannot buy your property, and therefore I should get my deposit back. So the home sale contingency is another piece that you might see on the exam. And then there's the default contingency. And again, that's probably a little bit lower probability if there's any kind of a default issue on there. So I'm going to say that D is definitely out of the game. Home sale contingency, inspection contingency, and finance contingency are, by the way, the three most important contingencies that you need to know the definition of. Please note that finance contingency might be called a mortgage contingency. The inspection contingency might be called something a little bit more robust. And then home sale contingency also is referred to as property sale contingency. All three of these, if you notice, are to protect the buyer. All three of them protect the buyer. And in essence, it protects the buyer from having to buy the house, and it protects their earnest money deposit, which they've put down in case the property doesn't appraise for the right number, if they can't get conventional financing, if the inspection yields negative results, or if they can't sell their property. So these are buyer side contingencies, by the way. And just to sum these up, common contingencies in our world are contingencies, by the way, are another definition that you want to just know. They're basically are conditions that must be met for the contract to proceed to the next steps. The classic ones, financing contingency, also known as the mortgage contingency, protects the buyer if they can't secure a loan. Inspection contingencies allow the buyer to back out if the home inspection reveals some kind of a major issue, or they can go back and negotiate further. So we can continue to negotiate if we find something that's yield satisfactory. Now, just really quickly, is it possible then to sell a property as is? And the answer is yes, absolutely you can. However, known defects must still be disclosed. So those are the little fine points that you'll see on exams that they trick you with. So if a seller knows of a defect, they have to disclose it. And a seller is in their right to say, hey, look, I'm not going to pay for anything. This is as is. But as is doesn't mean complete caveat emptor. It means that if you do know of a defect, you must disclose it. It doesn't mean that you have to repair it. And it means that the buyer must be made aware of it so that they can make an informed decision if they want to move forward. So the seller could be found liable, or the broker and the seller could be found liable for non-disclosure of these things, which is why we have seller's disclaimers and things like that, which we've talked about in previous sessions. So do definitely check those sessions and they'll help you. The appraisal contingency ensures the property is appraised at a certain value to meet or exceed the sales price to make sure that the investment is sound. And then the home sale contingency lets the buyer make the purchase contingent on selling their current home. Just as a tip, if you are doing deals right now and you see a home sale contingency, if you are representing the seller, then the question to ask the buyer's side is, where is the property located? And can you share with me any market absorption rates in the area to find out if, in fact, the property is going to move or sell in the amount of time? In many housing markets, depending where you are, some things, there might be a large amount of inventory of similar properties, and they just are moving slowly. They're moving, but they are taking months to sell versus a couple of days. And in other markets that you might know, I mean, the house goes on the market and seconds later, it's got multiple offers. So, again, those are all the considerations when looking at investments, obviously. But on the exam, home sale contingencies are pretty popular. They're not going to go into depth on market absorption rates or anything like that, but you definitely want to know these. I would say finance, highest probability, inspection, and home sale, with the appraisal contingency being more like a medium level opportunity. It could be an answer on a multiple choice scenario. All right. That was contracts. And again, it was just a speedy overview of what you should kind of focus on. In addition to that, a few other elements of contracts just to be aware of. A working definition of what a contract is. You'll possibly see things like, what is the statute of frauds? What is an express versus implied contract? Okay. And then let's say breach and termination of contracts are also parts that you want to know in addition to these elements. So with breach, there is something like liquidated damages, which they're going to test you on. Specific performance, that's another hot button on vocabulary. And you want to know about what happens when a contract, or how does a contract terminate, fulfillment, full performance, lack of performance, impossibility of performance, etc. So there's a couple of extra pieces. Remember, contracts across the United States makes the most percentage, most concentration on your exams between the national exam version and the state exams that you're going to be taking. So I would expect to focus heavily on contracts, do some good damage here, and the rest of the skill sets that you need to learn, you can start to focus on. But this is good. If you can make this, then you're going to do well. And as you're seeing, students many times do well in everything else and may do poorly on contracts, and it's the great decider. Lots of times students don't pass these examinations simply because of their contract understanding. So keep working, keep focusing, keep practicing, look for good contract questions, check out our site, and we have a ton of them. And the stuff that we're doing is relatively cutting edge compared to what I'm seeing. We're seeing a lot of positive feedback from thousands and thousands and thousands of folks. We're seeing lots of great comments. There's lots of consumption, and we've been doing this for such a long time. I think it's beginning to take effect, and we're seeing some positive outcomes. Again, my name is D. Kumar. Thank you very much. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. You're going to be, have access to tons of content, tons of information, and tons of really cool stuff far beyond what real estate examinations are. So the goal is to get you through that thing and then help you start getting deals done, close deals, make money, and move on. Be the best that you can be in this business. And that's my job today. Thank you very much for joining me during the exam breakdown. For the mortgage loan originators, we're helping y'all too. That's on Wednesdays around 12 o'clock. We're doing that nationwide mortgage licensing service exam prep. So I'm helping you with that. So if you want to attend, real estate folks, certainly do. You'll learn a thing or two. We go heavily into the legislation and stuff. So it's a little bit more of a different type of examination, but it's still similar or approximate to what we're doing. And then, you never know. Maybe mortgage finance is what you want to do as opposed to being a real estate professional. So again, other contemplations. Thank you once again for supporting the channel and checking us out and helping us grow. Things have been awesome. We are so grateful to be able to serve you. I will see you all on Wednesday. And oh yeah, part 4 of our amazing mega pack for the 2025 questions is about to drop, I think, at the end of this week. We're working on it right now. We're finishing it up. So, that's coming out. That's 100 amazing questions for you right there that are going to help get you through that examination. We're hearing feedback and it's like jaw-dropping. People are just crushing these exams. So follow that as well. Continue to work hard. Reach out to us if you have questions. I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see ya.